An EU summit in Brussels calls for a ceasefire in Gaza, but not for sanctions against Israel. Germany has led member states in blocking action throughout the war, while others express anger. So what's driving the EU's position on Israel and Gaza? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. European Union leaders meeting at a summit in Brussels have called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, a war in which some of the weapons used by Israel in its genocide have been developed or supplied by European states. But the bloc failed to agree on whether to take stronger action over Israel's conduct throughout the war. An internal investigation found human rights abuses committed by Israeli authorities and forces in Gaza breached its trade agreement with the EU. But discussion on that was postponed until next month. The 27 EU member states take decisions by consensus, and while some countries, including Spain and Ireland, called for sanctions, they were blocked by a group including Germany and Italy. Slovenia warned some member states could be forced to take action on their own if the bloc didn't do so collectively. So why is there such a reluctance in the EU to take action over Israel over Gaza? And could that position change? How does it all affect the bloc's standing globally, especially on issues like human rights? We'll talk to our guests shortly, but first a report from Joel Evans.
On the day European leaders met in Brussels, more than 100 people were killed in Gaza. The latest victims of Israel's genocide that's killed more than 56,000 people and injured over 130,000, with many maimed for life. Most Palestinians in the Strip have been displaced, and their homes lie in ruins. Many are facing starvation after months of Israel's blockade of food, medicine, and other essentials. At an EU summit in Brussels, leaders called for a ceasefire, but took no action against Israel. The bloc is split, with the majority of countries led by Germany refusing to impose sanctions.
It's difficult to comprehend, but there are historic reasons why certain countries adopt the stance that they adopt on this issue. But in my view, the degree of carnage and destruction and the death and injury to children cries out for a humanitarian response from Europe, cries out for a strong political response from Europe.
The EU is Israel's largest trading partner. An internal EU inquiry has found Israel is in breach of Article 2 of their trade agreement for human rights abuses.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is completely unacceptable, and that's the reason because the High Representative asks an assessment in the terms of Article 2 of the Association Agreement. The report is very clear. They are a systematic violation by Israel of human rights in Gaza.
If I may, to be brief, focus on one issue, which is the report presented to the Ministers of Foreign Affairs by the Human Rights Rapporteur on the catastrophic situation of genocide taking place in Gaza. Therefore, what I will call for today in the European Council is that Europe must suspend the association agreement with Israel.
Throughout the genocide in Gaza, some countries like Germany, Hungary and Italy have opposed sanctions against Israel and blocked attempts to take action. The summit did find agreement on a statement deploring the unacceptable number of civilian casualties and levels of starvation in Gaza. But in what is seen as a reflection of public anger and concern, some EU states, like Slovenia, suggested that if the EU cannot take collective action against Israel, individual countries should do so on their own. Meanwhile, as division in the EU over whether to take action becomes more visible, Palestinians in Gaza continue to suffer and face the risk of starvation. Those in the corridors of power elsewhere look on. Joel Evans, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. We're joined today from Brussels by Claudio Francavilla, the Associate EU Director of Human Rights Watch. From Dublin, Lynn Boylan, a member of the European Parliament for the Sinn Féin party and chair of the European Parliament's Delegation for Relations with Palestine. Also in Brussels, Giorgia Gusciglio, the Europe coordinator of campaigns for the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions movement promoting economic pressure against Israel. Welcome to you all. Claudia, let's start with you. So the EU says that there are indications that Israel's actions in Gaza are violating human rights obligations in the agreement governing its trade ties with the EU. Now, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said in response, "We will contact Israel to present our findings and look at how we can improve the situation on the ground." What do you make of that response? I mean, what's Israel going to say?
The truth is that they've been contacting the Israeli authorities for about 21 months now, and clearly that hasn't worked. There must be a place, a time when people realize that dialogue alone is not working, and in fact it has completely failed. If anything, the EU is about 60,000 lives too late in trying to move beyond the dialogue. People are being killed every day before our eyes. We see that on all the socials out there. And despite continuous statements, including one yesterday from the 27, the umpteenth statement calling for a ceasefire, for respect for international humanitarian law, for improved humanitarian aid, and so on, Israel continues to do the exact opposite. As a matter of fact, they had a formal meeting with the Foreign Minister of Israel, Gideon Sa'ar, in February in a gathering called the Association Council between the EU and Israel. And there you had all the 27 foreign ministers and the Israeli foreign minister. And the EU had a joint, very clear position, calling for a ceasefire, calling for improved humanitarian aid. The exact opposite has been happening. And let's not forget as well about the situation in the West Bank. The EU has also had very clear position about the situation in the West Bank. Israel continues to do the exact opposite. So the question there is really, at what point do you stop the dialogue, and at what point do you start employing, let's say, non-verbal forms of communication, such as the suspension of the association agreement?
Lynn, Kaja Kallas went on to say that if the situation doesn't improve, then we can discuss further measures, presumably meaning at the next meeting of ministers in July. In the meantime, of course, thousands of Gazans are on the brink of starvation. They're being shot dead as they queue for food aid. They continue to die in Israel's war on Gaza, which has already killed more than 56,000 people. Why the lack of urgency from the EU? Why isn't it taking concrete action against Israel, its biggest trading partner, now, when it can act pretty swiftly over countries like Russia and Venezuela?
Well, I think that's the frustrating part for all of us who've been calling for action for almost 2 years now, while we witness the devastation that we're seeing, because we've seen such swift action taken when it came to Russia, and rightly so. And that's, I suppose, the most damaging part for the European institutions now, is that the double standards are so blatant, and citizens can see that, and citizens are telling me that every single day, that they are ashamed of the European Union, that they believe its credibility is on the floor, that why should any country respect trade agreements or any other form of agreement or negotiation or cooperation with the European Union when Israel is able to just tear up international law with no consequences whatsoever. And I would just like to also come in just on what Claudio was saying about the dialogue. It's really interesting to note that when the dialogue was happening at the EU-Israel Association Council meeting in February, both myself and Rima Hassan and 2 senior officials were being deported from Israel for trying to do our job of going into Palestine and to serve a constructive role and meeting with civil society, with the Palestinian Authority. So that's the level of respect that Israel has in terms of dialogue with the European institutions, that it was deporting members of those institutions while sitting down and having dialogue. So I think the frustration is enormous. It's certainly not representative. The lack of action of the EU is not representative of the feeling of citizens, and it's not just citizens in Ireland. I'm being contacted by citizens from all across Europe, including Germany, including Austria, including countries that are hardline on this. So I would call on our European leaders to listen to the people and to stand up for international law and to now take action. We do not have time to wait until July.
Giorgia, Israel has pushed back against the EU report's conclusions, calling it outrageous and indecent. In its response, it set out the existential threat that it says it faces from Iran and Hamas. It reflects a blunt failure to distinguish between a democracy defending its citizens and genocidal countries and organizations that target Israeli civilians and use their own as human shields, it says. It demonstrates a blindness to the real threat to Israel, to regional stability, and ultimately to Europe itself. What do you make of that? Is that a valid argument?
Thank you. No, of course not. I mean, Israel has committed war crimes, crimes against humanity. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, has said that Israel is violating the rights of self-determination of the Palestinian people. It's committing the crime of apartheid. It's a crime against humanity. So he keeps violating all human rights, all international law measures, and he keeps doing so thanks to EU colonial hypocrisy and double standards. So this stance does not have any ground. And actually, the EU is a willing partner in genocide, in apartheid and military occupation. It keeps acting as a poodle for the US and Israel. It keeps undermining international law, enabling Israel to do unspeakable horror. And this is only possible thanks to military, financial, political, diplomatic, and other forms of unconditional support. So obviously, the EU has continued to choose business as usual, buying time to Israel to continue doing a live stream genocide. And only a strong response would have been able to stop this. So that's why the EU has to terminate the EU-Israel Association Agreement, but also stop the sale, transfer, and buying weapons from Israel, because it's the whole multilateral system that it's at stake. It's a whole system based on international law and human rights that is at stake. So, and I totally agree with the MEP Boylan about that we really see that the only shift that happen because of immense public pressure and mobilizations. And so it's only thanks to that that we need to continue, and we must pressure accountability and stronger measure and sanctions. And it's only because of that that finally the taboo of sanction has been shattered by states in the EU as well. And this is only possible really thanks to mobilization, grassroots work, legal action, and BDS work.
Claudio, despite opposing voices from countries like Ireland, Spain, Belgium, Slovenia, and Sweden, who's driving EU policy on Israel right now? And what is their reasoning? Is it one single country or a bloc?
It's not one single country. It's certainly a bloc. I would mention among the top 5 of the countries who are preventing EU action on Israel, I would say Hungary, the Czech Republic, Germany, Austria, Italy would be the chief ones, the ones who are mostly pro-Israel, if you will. And I think that a narrative shift that is needed there also within the government and maybe within some part of the population in these countries is that what they're doing is not pro-Israel, is anti-Palestinians, it's anti-international law, it's anti-human rights. The prevention of the adoption of some measures, since the dialogue has failed, the prevention of the adoption of some measures that could put some real pressure on the Israeli authorities to stop the televised extermination of the Palestinians in the apartheid that we are seeing unfolding day in, day out, is what these countries are doing. They are not pro-Israel, they are anti-law. And their inaction is leading to enormous abuses. On the other side, you maybe have a camp where you could put in into the country that you mentioned earlier, Spain, Ireland, Slovenia, Luxembourg. I would add also Belgium. But this is not enough. Unfortunately, to some extent, the EU is a bit a victim of its own architecture when it comes to foreign policy. A lot of the EU measures in foreign policy have to be adopted by unanimity from the member states, but some do not, and among them are the measures on trade. So the EU has the capacity to suspend the association agreement and to ban trade with settlements. Maybe we'll get to that at a later stage, by a qualified majority vote. And it's important to continue to put pressure also on the 5 countries that I mentioned earlier in order to ensure that there is a positive vote to adopt some of these measures.
Lynn, picking up on what Claudia was saying there, suspending the entire agreement with Israel is going to require the unanimous agreement of all the EU's 27 nations. It's unlikely to get that. Are there any measures that the EU could take against Israel with only some member countries? Could any country within the bloc, Ireland, for example, take unilateral action against Israel?
Well, I think what we have to remind the member states is that they're legally obligated to take action. So while they are members of the European institutions, they're all individually signatories to the ICJ. So therefore, there's obligations certainly around the illegal settlements, but also around the provisional findings on the case of genocide, and to do everything to prevent genocide. So that means supplying weapons, that means trading with Israel, because you're financially supporting a country that is potentially committing genocide according to the ICJ. So I think countries have to take unilateral measures. That comes with risks, of course, but I was very heartened to hear the Prime Minister of Slovenia say that in the absence of this consensus, that countries should come together, which would give them, I suppose, some level of cover and just move ahead on their own. And I think that those countries should be looking at sanctions on Israel, suspending all trade with Israel, and also banning trade with the illegal occupied territories. For those countries that are in the business of supplying weapons, that also should be ended immediately, because Israel cannot carry out this genocide without the ready supply of weapons. So those weapons are going in there every single day, including the components for the F-35 fighter jets. There's lots of European countries are providing those components to that scheme. So there are a number of measures that can be taken, but I keep reminding countries, you have your obligations. You are both morally and legally obliged to take action against Israel, and you cannot wait for the EU to have a consensus, because we're not going to get a consensus. It's not just the member states. Literally the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is one of the most pro-Zionist politicians that's in the European institutions, and we have seen her take solo runs in terms of its support for Israel. So we are not going to get a consensus at the EU level. So member states now just have to take action, because every single day lives are being lost in Palestine.
Okay, well, we'll come to von der Leyen in just a moment. But first, Giorgia, it's not just politics and trade. Even in sport and culture, the door has remained firmly open for Israel. Football, the Eurovision Song Contest. And yet Russia has been excluded for its actions in Ukraine. Why the double standards here? How do we explain this? Why not even symbolic action against Israel?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to the colonial hypocrisy and the double standards. The EU has always protected and given carte blanche to Israel to do whatever it wants. And so this also applies, of course, to all forms of support and ties that it has. Although the UN experts said repeatedly that in the obligations under ICJ, there are the EU, among all the states also, they have to cut all diplomatic, cultural, political support and ties in order to meet their legal obligations. And this is not gonna, and this is like super important, because it would send a strong message. And we've seen it, for instance, like already universities are taking matters in their own hand. And many universities are, for instance, no longer collaborating with Israeli institutions. They're not waiting for the EU to act. They're not waiting for this action from above, but they're taking pressure from the bottom up and excluding, for instance, Israeli universities and institutions from Horizon programs. Israel used to be one of the highest beneficiaries of funding from Horizon. And now, thanks to unilateral actions from many universities in Europe, we're seeing an insane increase. And this is a massive testament to the mobilization of students, academics, institutions that pressure institutions to end their academic ties.
Claudio, Germany's position on Israel has, of course, been shaped by its role in the Holocaust. Is that the primary reason Germany is behaving in the way that it is right now, or are other factors at play?
Well, the parliament and the governments of Germany, both the previous one and the current one, have been clear that the protection of Israel, the existence of Israel, is a Staatsraison, as they say, is the reason of state, is one of the reasons at the basis of the existence of the German state. And so I think you have entire generations of politicians, both in the parliaments and the government in Germany, who are trained really and to think that they should act in this way. And even if shame comes their way or blame comes their way, that's a tiny fraction of the suffering that they inflicted to the Jewish people during the Holocaust, which was, of course, possibly one of the worst crimes ever committed in humanity. And this is why I insist that it is important really here to flip the side of the coin and to show the price that is coming out of the position that the German government has been taking. By protecting Israel from any form of accountability, they are condemning the Palestinians to suffer everything that they've been going through. And while the German government is committed to the protection of the state of Israel, they are also very much committed to international law, at least in the statements and in their constitution. And there comes, among others, the obligations that they have as all parties to the UN Genocide Convention to employ all reasonable means to stop or prevent a genocide when it's unfolding. And it's important to stress that the obligation to employ those means is triggered not when there is a definitive, final, legal determination that genocide is unfolding, but when there is a clear understanding that there is a serious risk. Now, you have had binding orders issued by the International Court of Justice in January last year. You have had reports from UN experts, from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and many others, pointing to the genocidal nature, at least of some of the acts that are being committed by the Israeli authorities. So the Germans are completely missing in action when it comes to their obligations under the Genocide Convention, and they are really condemning the Palestinians to suffering the enormous abuses that they're suffering at the hands of the Israeli authorities.
Lynn, long a staunch ally of Israel, Germany's leadership appears now at least to be a little more outspoken in its criticism of the situation in Gaza, as is EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who's also German, as you mentioned a few minutes ago. Is that apparent shift in attitude anything other than words? Could it actually translate, do you think, into something more concrete?
I think that the shift happened in the sort of about 2 weeks ago when the images of starving children and Palestinians being effectively starved to death by Israel through the blockade was impossible for any politician anywhere in the world to defend, because you cannot defend children being starved to death when trucks are lined up at the border, when medical aid is being lined up at the border and it's not being allowed to get in. So I think that that's what led to the shift. That and, as we've heard, the public pressure, including, I'd imagine, in Germany, of citizens contacting their politicians and saying, this must stop, you cannot stand over this. Unfortunately, then we've seen the distraction of Iran and focus moved away from Gaza. And it seems to be that now we've nearly normalized the fact that every single day at the mercenary-run Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid sites, people are being gunned down, shot, desperately trying to get food and water for their children and for themselves. So I feel that the commentary that we heard was as a direct result of both the imagery and the people power, putting pressure on the German government, but it hasn't manifested into action. And when they had the opportunity to actually do something about it this week, they failed to do so. And that's why I go back to the need for countries now to just move ahead, because history will judge them very, very harshly if they sit back and say we can't do anything because our hands are tied due to some lack of consensus at the EU. That won't wash in the annals of history, and unfortunately, Palestinians will die in the interim. So I don't hold out much hope for change, either through the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, or through some change in the perspective of the German government. But also I would note that what is deeply concerning is not just what's happening to the Palestinian people, but those who are speaking out, those academics, the public, the citizens, the musicians, are being, effectively trying to be silenced now. And we're seeing that in Germany, we're seeing that in Britain, we're seeing that in other countries. So not only are our countries not taking action against the genocide that's happening, they're stifling the right of the freedom to assembly, the right to freedom of expression of their own citizens in defense of Israel. So it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But I really don't think that we are changing the mind of Commissioner von der Leyen or the German government anytime soon.
Giorgia, picking up on what Lynn was saying there, particularly about how history will judge this moment, how long can the past continue to govern the present and future on EU policy towards Israel? At what point do EU nations say, enough is enough, a line has been crossed, and the past is the past? Will history forever determine the future of EU policy on Israel?
Well, we certainly hope not. With the BDS movement, that's what we're trying to also do, to shift massively public opinion and change policy from the grassroots to the grass tops, and really shape a new understanding and new policies that will actually make sure that this never happens again. And this is I think Palestinians are teaching us huge lessons of resilience and steadfastness in resisting 77 years of apartheid, colonialism, illegal occupation. And the movement, the solidarity movement, has shown that they will keep taking the streets and keep pressuring and keep mobilizing until the EU walks the talk of human rights and international law and fulfill its legal obligation. So I am confident that that time will come. I think we are close to the South Africa moment of Palestine that brought about the end of the apartheid regime in South Africa, because more and more Israel is isolated, not maybe from Europe, but from the global South. And the EU will have to follow because its own credibility is at stake.
Okay.
So we continue.
There, I'm afraid we must end it. Many thanks indeed to you all. Claudia Francavilla, Lynn Boylan and Giorgia Gusciglio. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. That's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha, we'll see you again. Bye for now.
Don't miss out, get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.